Hello, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Finish More Music podcast. So I'm delighted to be joined by Rashid Ajami today. He is a man who's not only a DJ, he's a producer, he's heavily into multimedia creativity as well. And I'm dead keen to dive in to find out how he balances all of this, his creative process, how he thinks about his art. So we've got a lot to get stuck into. Rashid, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us, buddy.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to chat.
So I think starting at the top, really, I want to dive into the music, but I'm really keen to understand how you organize your day and balance things, because there are a lot of people who maybe even are just starting out and are balancing things with full-time careers as well. There's always some kind of balance, and you have a lot of creative outlets. So what does a day in the life of you look like at the moment?
Absolutely. So at the moment, I've kind of moved to a more fluid approach to my routine. But generally, when I wake up, I try to get straight out the house and go for like a walk, go to the park, kind of just take 1 hour of just being outside to kind of just meditate a little bit, kind of just get into the zone. Then I usually come home and then I'll focus on whatever kind of specific to-dos I have on that day, which might be like finishing a track, dealing with some admin related stuff. But I find that just having that initial morning, get out the house, kind of unwind moment really helps, to kind of get the day started. In the afternoon, I'll also typically kind of then take 2-3 hours to look at just pure creativity around projects. So it's kind of a much more like fluid process of, maybe looking at something to do with art installations or NFTs, or, really just trying to explore different kind of disciplines and giving myself that time essentially like every day to do that.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I'm exactly the same as you, particularly with the weather as it is, getting out in the morning, getting like movement, getting into some kind of motion, firm believer that emotion follows motion. So getting out, having some white space is like huge for me as well. So obviously you've got these different projects. How do you decide which one you're going to put your time to? So I know you were mentioning that sometimes it's fluid, but I'm imagining there are deadlines and labels want things, or you've got, some sort of installation you're doing. How do you manage all of that from the sort of more macro view?
Absolutely. So I guess for me, the core activity is the production. So that is always the priority. So it's important that I'm constantly, getting tracks done, and making sure that that's always happening, essentially. So that's my kind of core priority. If I'm slacking with that, then I'll take a step back on the other activities to make sure that I'm constantly producing and just getting the records done. Because I feel that those releases are kind of like the core, which everything then wraps around. And then of course I'll have a lot of deadlines like DJ mixes, or some interviews I need to do. So I make sure that's all organized in my diary, and I give myself enough time to do those without stressing, so I can, I take a week before to plan out the DJ mix, record it. If I make some mistakes or I want to go back to it, I have the leeway of that time to really deliver it in the best possible way.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And I love this idea of making sure, I guess you could think of it almost like the production line is still moving, because if you lose focus on that, it'll just become the point where it's barren, and you're a creative, so create first, I guess, is the core message there. So getting to that, and I'm keen to explore, I caught you sort of saying that it's the core that everything wraps around, so I'm keen to get to that as well. But if we start on the production process side of things, how do you approach writing a new track? Do you have sort of the same routine that you go about, or are there different ways that you approach a new piece of music? What's your workflow look like?
So for me, it's quite interesting because the core of a track comes really quickly if I'm inspired. So I work quite quickly, and I have quite a lean setup initially in terms of that initial creativity. It's actually, for me, the easier part is kind of just flowing in the studio and coming up with an idea that I'm happy with. For me, it's really also it's based on mood. So if I feel inspired, let's say I've gone on a walk, I'm feeling really positive, there's this urge to kind of jump into the studio. So it's those moments that I try to take advantage of, to jump into the studio, close the door, 2 hours, and just really start to play. And it's kind of, I find it's those moments that something good comes. If I try to force it, you know, I'm not feeling great. It's one of those days. It's, you know, I'm trying to push myself. I never really have that click moment where something comes out that I'm happy with. So I'd say it's catching those moments of inspiration and then maximizing on them by getting in the studio and flowing, essentially.
Yeah, I love that, the word play that you use there as well. So you've got this the sort of pressure-free zone of you're sitting playing, something catches your ear, and then you mention it's quite quick to get that transformed into a finished track. How long does that take, and what does finished mean to you at this stage? Is that like fully mixed and mastered, or it's maybe to what we might consider a demo stage? What does that actually look like, the rest of the steps?
So I'd say the part that's quick is the creation of the idea, just because, especially if I'm making the kind of music that I'm known for, I have quite a specific sound. So I understand like the layers of what typically makes up one of my tracks. Like I also love to explore because I don't want to be in a box in terms of my sound. But if I am making like you know, organic house, kind of deep house music, I typically know the sounds that I like and kind of the structure that I like. So that creativity where I find an idea that I like can happen within, like, let's say 2 to 6 hours. That's just roughly. I can do that in 1 to 2 sittings. Then the process of taking it and arranging it, mixing it, and taking it all the way to like a perfect track, it slows down. That becomes a longer process. It could take me a month, 2 months, even. Like, it really depends. But there's not much compositional change at that point. At that point, it's much more just like, is the mix good? You know, is the arrangement as good as it could be? Am I extracting the best out of the melodies and the composition of it? But that composition part comes super quickly for me. It's not like I spend a month trying to like recreate melodies and try 100 different melodies. The melodies just come together quite quickly. And I typically after that don't change them dramatically if I like what I've done. And if I don't like what I've done, I just scrap it and it's a fresh start.
Right, totally. Okay, so then just so I get the clarity, 2 to 6 hours, you mentioned a musical idea. What's a musical idea to you? What would I see if I was looking in your DAW at that point?
So a musical idea to me would be essentially like the key elements all jamming together and it feels like that's the peak of the track. So it would be like, I'd have the bass line, an arpeggiator, a pad, a vocal idea, because then if I do go and record a vocal with a vocalist, then there's a time, of course, of I need to send it to the vocalist, get it back. That will slow down the end result. But it's essentially, it's enough that I could send you 2-3 minutes and you're going to be like, whoa, this is great. This sounds cool. I love it. Like all the elements are there. From that point, then it's, you know, the heart of the track, the feeling of the track is there. And the next process becomes, okay, like, is that the right hi-hat? Maybe I should change the sound. You know, let's start arranging it and like getting a kind of flow of the track, you know. Then it slows down. But by that point in my mind, the compositional sound is already kind of there. It's established.
Yeah, I love that. I wrote down the word heart, the heart of the track. That's a beautiful way of describing it. Yeah, so get that, and then the time extends out. Presumably, in that time, you're sort of revisiting it and then taking a break to get that perspective to come back, rather than, you know, you sometimes get to that stage where you can't see the wood for the trees if you're too close to the piece of music.
100%. It's funny because I always joke with my friends who produce it. It's like a race initially, to some degree, of not getting sick of the track before you've like kind of, you know, if you spend too long just hammering away at something, you can get a bit sick of it and then you lose perspective on if it's good or not. So for me, like that initial bit has to be really free flowing, and then you take a break, you come back, because it might not even be that, you know, there's been times where I've done that and I think I have a great record. I come back and I'm like, okay, maybe not. But, you know, if I come back and that feeling and that heart is still there and I have that excitement, that's when I'll press on with the track. Because I've had many times where I'll try and force it and I don't feel that heart in the past. and I go and I mix it and I master it. I'm trying everything like to rearrange it, but at the end, the track doesn't have that heart that is what makes something, you know, which is, you know, for my music, it's really focused on feeling. So if it's lacking that feeling from the beginning, no matter what you do later, the feeling can't be recreated essentially for a good mix or something like that.
Yeah, totally. And I want to steer us back to this in a second, but it's kind of taken us somewhere else, which is the feeling of emotion. And I saw you mentioning previously about inspiring kind of dreams and emotion in music. What's the motivation behind that? Because, you know, you could have picked loopy techno, for example, which for all its merits, and I absolutely love the style of music, isn't necessarily going to be something that inspires a range of emotions throughout a track necessarily. So I wonder what's your motivation around that, going for this style of music?
I think it's probably a personality trait that I like music that's kind of nostalgic and hits you on the emotional level, like when you feel something, or something that's like a bit majestic and inspires you and makes you feel like you could conquer the world. I mean, my first ever track was kind of that did well was called Rule the World. And I remember back then I was trying to make all these like inspirational tracks, like Unstoppable, Rule the World. So I've always just myself liked music that gives me feeling, that helps me on my day-to-day life. And so naturally, I've just been inclined to making that music. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fab. Now, this is something that I find really interesting because there's very clearly a creative direction for you that you've already got in place here, but it's not something that boxes you in a really strict, rigid way. It's not saying, oh, it has to sound specifically like this, but it's almost like a true north that guides the artwork that you're going to make. And so most of your tracks are going to tick these boxes of that word majestic, which I thought was fantastic, unstoppable, things like that. So ways that music makes you feel and that will make other people feel is already something that's ingrained in the direction, like the overarching mission statement, if you like, of the project, without getting too corporate into the world of art. But it feels like that's something that you've got as your true north at all times.
Absolutely. For me, that's the most important thing. And, you know, a big indicator is if I can listen to one of my own tracks and have a strong feeling when I listen to it multiple times and, you know, over a period of time. And those are always the tracks that do the best, where I still have that emotional connection to them and it doesn't kind of dissipate over time.
And do you have like a peer group and other people that you bounce ideas off of, as well as using your own intuition, of course, being the final decider on what you're doing with your music? But do things get shipped out and get other people's thoughts? Is it connecting with them, for example?
Absolutely. I try to do that as much as possible. There's like pros and cons I found to that, where often it's taste based. So I've had so many times where I've shown people certain tracks and they're like, you know, it's really not my style. And those tracks actually do super well. And they're some of my better tracks, and a lot of other people kind of resonate with them. So I do it, but with a pinch of salt, essentially, because it's one of those things where ultimately, if I'm feeling it and I'm really happy with it, I know it's good.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I imagine as well, if you're able to communicate to them this feeling, for example, if you were to send something to me and say, I'd be really keen on your thoughts on it, I'd be in a much stronger position to give you valuable feedback, knowing this true north that we've just talked about, this idea of, okay, I want this to feel majestic and this and that, because that way it starts to align me to your taste as opposed to my own taste. And then there's clearly the differentiator between taste and quality that I think a lot of people get mixed up. Quality is inherent in all of us. We can appreciate the quality in something even if it's not to our taste. So I love the fact that the pinch of salt is to be able to take the other person's viewpoint and their perspective and understand that in contrast or juxtaposition with your own, I guess.
Absolutely. And I think with time, you become more comfortable with that. You like start to trust your own judgment a little bit more. I mean, I sent one of my unreleased tracks to like a really, really big producer the other day. And they're like, oh, we love this. You know, when are you going to release this? And in my heart, I don't think it's good enough to release. I just feel like it is a good track, but it's lacking something to make it like extra special. And I probably won't release it, but it's interesting to see that perspective, that someone else who's, you know, very established will listen to it and say, oh, look, it's a fantastic track. But I'm at a point where I know myself and what I'd like to put out there. And I think over time you become more picky, I guess, or I don't know if that's the right word, but you become a little bit more, you know what you want to get out there, you know the sound you want to put out there, you know the message you want to put out there, so you're a little bit more selective. Like when you first start, it's kind of like, oh, I finished a track, let me send this to every record label on the planet. It's not even finished yet, but like, let's just send it everywhere, and you're excited. But over time, I think I start to analyze finished tracks. Not everything's coming out. It becomes...
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. So just out of interest, what will happen to that track? So you don't decide to release it, but will it feature in your DJ sets or in this person's DJ sets potentially? Will you still allow it out into the world?
So often with that, what I'll try and do is find someone that I want to collaborate with and be like, what do you think of this? Do you want to collaborate on it? To just rework it into a fresh kind of thing, because they might take the parts and just take it to that next level or take it in a different direction. So I'll use a lot of those tracks to kind of create collaborations with people, essentially, where, you know, they take the stems and then something else is created off the back of it. That's kind of my first port of call. If that doesn't happen, it could be a free download that I'd give away. It could be music that I'd use for an NFT, or like I'd adapt it, cut it up a little bit. And so I like to try and use it in the end. And some just will never come out. Of course, there's a few that you know, they've just been sitting on my
don't quite make the grade yet, but maybe in the future there'll be a lightning bolt of inspiration to change those up. Now you've touched on something that I really wanted to explore as well. Obviously, throughout your journey, I mean, you've been releasing for like over a decade now, and you mentioned at the beginning just trying to get music out anywhere, and you've become a lot more selective and picky, I think was the term that you've used, as you know, your profile and authority is built in the scene. What was the tipping point? Can you remember a moment? It might have been the first release that you felt was on a really established label, but what was the tipping point for you where you felt you made quite a big step up, and what was responsible for it?
I'd say the first two big releases I had, which was this Rule the World track and then a track on Anjunadeep. Both of the tracks had a lot of feeling, but the production level was not great. I mean, like, they could have been a lot better. They could have been arranged better, better mix. The drums were sparse. So that's because I kind of just had an idea, got super excited, wanted to finish it as quickly as possible and just get it out there. And I was lucky that they did get signed to great labels, because there was a lot of emotion in the tracks. But looking back, I imagine, damn, if I'd created that track now, the way I would have developed it, it would have been much better, essentially, just overall, like from a quality perspective. So after those two releases, I started to kind of slow down a little bit and try to improve the production level, the arrangement, kind of the composition, and just take a little bit more time. But really, it's the last 2 years, like that I've matured to the point where I'm much more honest with myself, in terms of, you know, I'm very honest with myself when I look at what I'm doing. I'm no longer like rushing things. I'm looking at the tracks, seeing how I can improve them. I'm going more slowly.
And obviously now you have the experience to back that up. You can obviously see and hear things now as the current version of Rashid that you of course couldn't back then. I mean, it's great as well that they pick them up, and shows, I think, to a lot of people who are aspiring to get on those labels that, of course, the production quality and the mix down engineering, all of that stuff is very important. However, a lot of these label owners are listening first and foremost to the musicality and the emotion in the track. Did they help you, mentor you in any way? Did you encounter sort of mentors along your journey as a result of getting your tracks out on these labels?
I mean, it's funny enough, not so much. I mean, I never... A lot of these labels, they just kind of took the track, and I'd even notice things after their sign that I'd want to change. Like, I'd be like, wait, that kick's too loud. I remember, like, I had it released on a massive label, and they signed it, and then I was listening back, and like, this kick is way loud. So I had to change it and then send them the new version before it got released. But had I not said anything, it would have just come out with this insanely loud kick. So I find that funny enough, in the dance industry, you don't have that same which maybe you have in other kind of genres where they take it and help you develop the track. I've had it one or two times where certain labels have said, look, can you make like this build up a little bit more, bigger, or, can we change certain things, less vocal? That's one I've had recently. Actually, the label kind of gave me a lot of feedback, and they're like, we like these tracks, but there's too much vocal in them. We want to make it a little bit more minimal. So it's been interesting, but yeah, typically I found that I have to kind of myself be really happy with the final product and be like, I know this is what I want. I'm happy with this being out in the world. And at that point, I'll start to actually demo it. So I sit on the track a lot longer before I send it out now.
Right, totally. And this leads me into something else that I'm interested in. Obviously, you've got to have a bunch of connections as you grow. How did you make those? How did you, for example, get that first release on Anjunadeep? Was it literally just submitting it, or had you managed to make some connections first? What's your strategy for building connections? Because I know a lot of people listening will be in a place where maybe they've sent music to labels and it's disappeared into the black hole of nothing coming back, that can be demoralizing, frustrating, and people can even turn on themselves and go, well, I'm no good, my music's no good. It might not be the case. It might just not have been heard. We don't know. But I'm wondering what your strategy is for making those connections in the industry.
Yeah, totally. I'd say the first thing is it's surprising that when you do send to like kind of the generic demo act addresses, you can hear back. I mean, with me with Anjunadeep, I just sent it to their demo address, and then I remember they just got back to me, and I developed the relationship slowly. So I was always doing that and kind of sending it out just to like wherever you're meant to submit the music. But of course, I agree, even till today, you can often just never hear back. I mean, I have certain tracks that I'm sitting on now that I think are the best tracks I've ever made, and I've sent them to a few kind of like demo addresses, and I never heard back. It's clearly never even listened to it. So it's totally normal, and it's just a kind of matter of being persistent and having grit and just consistently just not getting demoralized, essentially. Like if you feel the track is good, it's not going to be for everyone. That's another thing actually, which is most of my tracks that have been signed to big labels have also been rejected by 20 other labels until it gets signed by, Anjunadeep. Probably like 10 smaller labels rejected the track, and then Anjunadeep took the track. So it's really a matter of like kind of taste, perspective, who's listening to it, how their mood on that day when they're listening to it. There's so many factors. So I think it's just about being really persistent, sending it out. If you meet the right connections as well, great. If you meet people that might, know certain people and can help you kind of get your music heard, over time that develops and you kind of build more personal relationships. But I think that issue of not hearing back, it's just part of the industry. I still have that all the time. I mean, it's
right. And I love this, the persistence and the grit, and the way that I often look about these things across life in general is sometimes it comes down to holding your nerve.
Yes.
Can you just keep going, stay in the game, despite the discomfort, despite the inner dialogue you might be feeling? Can you just hold on a bit longer and a bit longer? And in terms of the connections, is there a methodology that you've also used to build connections outside of hitting just the demo inboxes?
Yeah, I mean, a few, but they come often by coincidence. Like, for example, like my music publisher and a music lawyer who helps him with my contracts and the publishing. I met him very early on in my career just by email. I'd sent a few tracks, and he had a bunch of connections in the industry. So he started to help me kind of demo out to a few labels and help me build those connections. So you meet people along the way that I think are like kind of open the gate and have those connections already. And it's a matter of kind of building those relationships and friendships in like a nice way. Like, I'm one of those people, like I struggle to ask for favors. So I would never really, like, if someone knows like a famous guy, like Dixon, let's say, I would never really ask them to send a demo. I just would rather find my own way. But it is important, of course, to have relationships and connections with people that can help, and you develop that slowly over time, and then you build a group essentially of people that, you know, support your music and help you get out.
Totally. Awesome. Now, I did say that I was going to take a diversion, and I do want to revisit something very quickly before we move on, because I want to dig into the whole NFTs and the multimedia side of things, because I think it's really fascinating. I picked up from a previous interview that you said, I quote, "I put my energy in the composition, story, and feeling of the tracks, as I feel this is where the sound is truly defined." And that was in response to a question about what tools you use. So I'm really interested, because I know this is another kind of a block, I think, for a lot of people. They see lots of artists having all these squillions of tools and think, if I own this thing, then I'll become a great music producer, typically piling more and more overwhelm and problems onto their shoulders. So I was really keen just to hear your take on that in general before we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it's the less is more approach, like all the way when it comes to production. So, I mean, for example, there's like a plugin called Omnisphere by Spectrasonics, where, I mean, for me, it's such a powerful kind of plugin that has so many sounds, but it's one interface to kind of understand. I can pretty much do everything with that plugin. I can find any sound on the whole planet is in that plugin. So, you know, I decided like a while ago, like, why not just master that one plugin and feel really relaxed? If I need to get to a sound, I just open it up and I'm like, okay, I need I need whatever it is, like a bass line. Okay, here's my list of bass lines. Here's the ones I like. Here's the ones like, you know, I've used before, whatever it is. So I'm much more of that approach of very few tools that you know how to use really well. But then I'm not saying you don't explore other things. You know, of course, like I have a friend that he kind of produces only with modular, and he has this amazing modular studio, and it's insane, and he has amazing Moogs and hardware synths. So if I do want to get a taste of that, or I do want to kind of utilize that, I'll go to his studio, you know, see what he's doing, understand the sounds. I can jam in the studio there, pull it into my project if I want that sound, and come back into my lean setup where I'm very comfortable. But I'm all for, like, I'm all for like super lean, like just knowing these things really well. Yeah.
So very much having the tools being an extension of you, so that you have the idea, it comes through your body, and you know what you're doing. There's no block. You're just able to express yourself in the moment, rather than that, oh, and how do I use this thing? And then that spark can just be gone.
Absolutely.
Totally. So if we move on now to the multimedia side of things, just, I guess my opening question that I'm curious about is, what is it that inspires you or lights you up about tackling a variety of different creative projects and moving outside of music, for example?
So for me, I've always loved art of all forms. And every time I used to go to galleries and see immersive exhibitions, I'd always be a little bit disappointed. Like, you go in and it's like some kind of weird movie which makes no sense, and it's like super boring, and you're just trying to get something out of it, but it also lacks like that feeling. So I just love the idea of how do you blend all these different kind of disciplines to create something that's just like insane and amazing and different. You know, I feel that art shouldn't have boundaries, like where, you know, this is music and this is painting and this is lighting, and how do you blend that all together to create something that's really kind of fresh and new? Excites me a lot. So that's kind of what piqued my interest. At the same time, my sister is like an immersive artist, and she kind of built this whole immersive thing for kids in New York, which was really elaborate. And, you know, I used to go to see it, and the different teams and the way all those teams engage with each other, it was really exciting. So I think all of that together motivated me to start to look at how do you push the barrier a little bit to kind of blend these things together.
Right, and again, you dropped in that word feeling again. I'm really getting the core of that, because it came in again as to, I went to these other things and it was like bland, boring, didn't touch me, and it was like, how can I create a feeling through it? So it really hits home. I love it. how does, or maybe it's the same, your creative process differ? So you talked obviously in the about music and the idea of sitting down and playing and having a period of time to get the what we would say is sort of the basic composition before concerning yourself with the wider arrangement and orchestration, for example, the finer details. Is it a similar creative process when you're looking at building this immersive sort of installation, or do you have a different approach to that?
I think the initial, it's a bit different in the sense that the initial ideas really, there's kind of no limit and it's in your imagination. So like, you know, one idea we're working with now is creating like an exhibition where you walk through an entire world and it's all about being human and coming back to being human, you know, because it's like, we've kind of lost that sense of the senses and touch and everything of the digital age and of Corona and all of that. So it becomes much more than about big ideas and concepts and what we want to achieve. And just, that's really fun and like super kind of wide. But then the technical part of doing it, something like that, is a little bit different because you need to bring people with certain different skill sets. You know, there's people in the world who've been doing lighting for like 40 years. I know nothing really about lighting compared to them. So then it becomes about the team. It's so important at that point, if you're doing something like an immersive exhibition, to have a collective of people from different disciplines that all share the same vision and how you manage that all together. So it's a much slower process because you have to essentially like bring a team together of all the different elements that you need, sound design, lighting, installation, like whatever it might be. And get that team all aligned on a vision to then, you know, implement.
Yeah, sure. So if I step that back to the beginning, where do and how do the initial ideas come together? So, I mean, I love this idea. You know, you sold it to me without having to say very much. This idea of walking through this experience and, you know, the rediscovering the things that make us human that we are perhaps overlooking or are passing us by. I mean, I also meditate. You mentioned meditation, so you're much more in touch with those things. But for people who don't, the digital world is kind of taking over a lot of our senses. So that really, I find that super exciting. But how and when and where do those ideas come from to kickstart such a big project?
So I feel the rough ideas will just come, as you said, through just walking. When I'm walking around, my mind is always kind of, if I'm not trying to meditate and be still, I'm trying to be creative, and I'm like just coming up with, oh, that it could be really interesting if we created like a, you know, an exhibition where you have a rave, but then how would that work? And it's like, what kind, you know, what's the difference between a real rave and a rave in an exhibition? And it's just this whole process that starts it off. Then I'll take it to the people that, like my sister, for example, and we'll start to brainstorm and just throw ideas at each other, essentially. Take it a little bit further, like, okay, cool. So we're saying that we want it to be like the senses. We're saying one room needs to be like, to do with being in a rave, let's say. So what would that look like? It must be industrial. It must be like a warehouse. What are we trying to achieve with that? What are we trying to make people feel? What are we trying to make people think about? Why is it going to be interesting? And we just bounce those ideas. Once we have some kind of concept built around that, we'll take it to the further team, and then we'll start to kind of almost build a deck, like in a rough way. We'll start to build the concept out, and it kind of just happens naturally. It's the back and forth. People are throwing ideas together, and then before you know it, you have this deck, which is like, okay, about the senses, rave room, this, and it comes together. Then it becomes more technical, essentially, and then you start to kind of, it's almost the same like making a track. You go back and you start to think of how the technical merges with the idea, and then that refines it even more, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me a little bit. We do a free workshop once a year, which is something that is not just like watching YouTube videos of me clicking about with a screen share. It's actually a script, and we film it in different locations and all of these things. And so I come up with that initial idea, and then that gets bounced around, and then our videographer comes on, and then they're creating storyboards, and it's the same kind of thing of that high level idea getting chunked down until where they're doing the technical thing of going, oh, that didn't work quite as we thought it would, so this expert needs to fix that bit. bit. So yeah, I totally get it, and the parallels to music line up really well. And you just mentioned the idea of the rave installation. Can you see, or are you thinking of any possibilities of bringing this into actual clubbing festival environments where your main music might play? And I guess that loops us back beautifully to that point that I wrote at the beginning, where you said that the releases were the core that everything wraps around. So I'm wondering if there's a big picture or something that might be going on. I may even be tapping into the future here that you might go, I don't want to tell anyone yet, but I'm really curious.
No, completely. Because to me, the idea of what music and sound design you would put in an exhibition is really exciting, specifically because you have a lot more flexibility of what you can do with sound design. Like the idea of, if you, let's say you're in some rave room and you're able to slice the sound in that room into 4 sections, which are playing different music. So as you move around this warehouse, one side is playing disco, the other side is like playing techno, one side's playing, so, and it's just all merging and blending. Like there's technology that you can use of sound design for an installation that allows you to really be much more creative, essentially. So that's what excites me about these concepts, is that one thing's listening to music on headphones or in a nightclub, but can you take it a step further to really make the music and the sound design technology work together to just create something kind of mind-boggling, essentially?
That's fascinating stuff. So do you have one of these installations up for people to check out at the moment, or is there a due date that something's coming? So I'm personally really excited to check this out, just listening to your passion for these things and in hearing how your mind's working on it. I'd love to be able to step into the tangible version of that and experience it.
Absolutely. So the big kind of immersive concept we're working towards next year, so mid next year, hopefully. We've been talking to gallery spaces. We're looking at, we're building the whole concept out. We have a really amazing team with like multi-disciplines. So that's kind of the big thing. This week I'm releasing an NFT for the first time, which is, I've been working on for a couple of months. So that's kind of like a first step at just creating some digital artwork. But on the immersive side, it just takes a long time because it's so large scale. And I only want to do it large scale. Like I really want it to be something that's just phenomenal. So it's almost like a business. You have to like have the funding, you have to have the gallery on board, right. You have to have the right people. It's bringing that all together. But the concept's really been built in a nice way. So hopefully mid next year, there'll be like a really big scale London exhibition that then, if it goes well, we could take around the world. And
amazing.
Your idea is great, by the way. Like if you could stick it into a festival somehow as well, and it would be pretty cool as well.
Yeah, that's it. Well, look, I'm definitely going to keep on your ear to let me know when that's out for sure. So you mentioned the NFTs, and that this is something that you're exploring. For people listening who have zero idea of what this is all about, can you explain what NFTs are and what you are doing with your art in conjunction with it?
Absolutely. So again, when it all came out with this crypto stuff, I also kind of wasn't really like an expert, but what I realized from it is that essentially an NFT allows you to put out a digital artwork. Well, not even digital, it could be any kind of artwork, even a physical artwork. And you kind of create a unique token that links to that artwork via cryptocurrency. So people can purchase the artwork via cryptocurrency, but that artwork is essentially, it has provenance. It means that if someone sells it, trades it, it's always linked and unique to like a certain code that when you create it, essentially. So why that excites me is because as someone that likes to mix music with art, it's a really quick and cool way to kind of just experiment with that and put out digital artwork. So even put out kind of like some kind of limited edition, like song or whatever it might be, and have a way to kind of actually launch that without needing a gallery, without needing like a bunch of costs, without having to kind of, it's a great way to put out digital artwork in an easy way, essentially.
So somebody comes and they're actually buying the NFT that says, I own that piece of art, but that piece of music could still be shared with, multiple people, but this person is the owner of it, which is sort of a prestige thing, is it, that someone is likely to do that?
it could be a prestige thing. It's almost just like collecting physical artwork. So, there's people they're just collecting a ton of digital artwork instead, or music as well. So it's essentially, yeah, you would own the music, and then it's your choice whether you want to make that public or not. But for me, it's another medium or platform to do creative stuff. I mean, it's a very saturated market. Everyone's kind of trying to jump onto NFTs. People are trying to do it to make money and stuff. The way I see it is it's just a way to kind of put out cool artwork, but have it a little bit more formal, where it's official, it's got a unique ID to it. In 10 years from now, if I become some big artist, like that work will still have like its unique ID. It can be sold, it can be traded. It's not like I'm just creating an artwork and sticking it on YouTube. It allows it kind of to have a life. So that's what I like about NFTs, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, that's I hadn't considered that, but in some respects, there is the investment aspect of it, that somebody could say, okay, I'm really into what this guy or girl is doing. I'm going to pick up this art, and then let's see what their journey is. And effectively, that could become worth a lot more in the future. Ultimately, it's like, this, because I think it's Twitter, isn't it? Didn't they sort of sell an NFT for the first ever tweet or something like that? That's just happened as well. So someone's technically owning a slice of history.
Yeah, completely. It's like, with the music side, a good analogy is limited edition vinyls. It's like certain tracks that I'm very interested in releasing music that only comes out on like a limited edition vinyl of 100, let's say 100 vinyls. This is a kind of a digital version of that. You could say, 20 people will be able to purchase this track and own it. They're the only ones who can download it and have access to it, or even listen to it. You could do it, it's whatever rules you make, essentially. So it's kind of like a digital way of owning a really limited vinyl of an artist. So like in 20 years, if that artist like made history and it was, really grew, you'd have that like unique song that it's that kind of exciting idea, which for me is just cool. It's just cool to think of different ideas and how different angles at releasing music, essentially.
Yeah, and another thing that's really coming across to me a lot is that you're someone who's always looking at innovative new things. You're not, so probably fidget around a bit in your chair if there's not something new going on. I'm kind of getting that impression. What is it that sort of going after these new experiences resonates so much with you?
I'd say it's twofold. It's like firstly is the excitement of like the final product and the kind of seeing something come to life that's original, but also I actually enjoy the how to building something new. Like it's great. I mean, I love releasing a track on a label, but I know the process now. I mean, you send it to the label, sign the contract, they give you the release date, you have your little asset of the cover, you post it on Instagram, and so on and so on. And it's great. And it's still the core. As I said, for me, it's the core to release music and have people listen to my music. But it's very exciting when you have these project by project kind of, you take an idea and you do project by project, and each one's unique. Each one needs different people to collaborate. Each one has different challenges. Each one has different opportunities. You meet people, you see new things. It takes your brain to different places. If I'm doing an immersive event, I need to go like explore galleries. I need to see what people are doing. It takes me out onto the art scene. Makes me watch documentaries about big immersive artists. So it's that whole exploration that I really enjoy, and I find that fun. And it's just that journey. It's enjoying the journey of the creation, and then kind of reveling in the end of it.
Yeah, totally. And I love the idea of the connections as well, because creativity is a game of connections at the end of the day. If you say, hey, write a piece of music to this movie, straight away there's a connection and you're building your creativity between it. So you're ultimately feeding your muse in a kind of romantic notion, and then everything that you're doing will funnel back into the music or into an immersive art installation that you're doing, the NFTs, for example. Can you think of any particular instance that has happened? I realize I might be chucking you under the bus here, but any time where one of the experiences of pursuing one art form has sort of married up into another one, has inspired another piece of art for you?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing, for example, that I'm working on now is this concept of if you take film, like just in general, like you have music videos and then you have all this kind of stuff and films. And then I was looking at the live streams that people were doing in lockdown. And I found that like typically the coolest live streams that I was seeing were the ones with some kind of like huge landscape behind the person. Like they're doing it on Niagara Falls or something. And that was like the go-to like big, insane live stream, someone like standing and in some kind of cool place. So I was like, well, what if you push the boundary on live streams and I create like, let's say a 1 hour film, which is actually like a live stream or like a DJ set. So we're like, I'm DJing, but there's actors and it's a film and it cuts off into like a story. And there's like 1 hour of a set, but within that set, it's like me and like, you know, doing the performance with a whole entire story and actors around it and an interesting set. And it's a movie essentially, but it's a DJ set at the same time. So that to me is like an interesting amalgamation of two things that I haven't yet seen. So once, you know, when that came to my mind, immediately I reached out to like a filmographer and like a director that I know are super creative and they have the style that I imagined for that. And we just started to collaborate. We created a deck, created the concept. Now I'm just looking for the funding element of that and like how to bring it together. But it's that process that's so exciting. And through that, I'm like talking and chatting to these really cool directors, and we'll bring actors in and interview actors and build the concept. And I have to think about the music, and it becomes exciting, essentially.
And this is great because we get to, you know, be on the receiving end of these projects that you're coming up with. It's really like innovative stuff. Now, before I dive into sort of future ventures, we've already touched on some of them. I am curious because the way that you speak, and you're very prolific, super sort of positive guy. Do you experience, or have you experienced, any creative blocks in the studio? And if you have, how did you overcome them? Because so many people, you know, end up really stifled or really caught against specific blocks and they can't move forward. So I always love to hear how somebody who's kind of smashing it out the park has dealt with those, if indeed you have experienced any or currently do along your journey.
Absolutely. No, I do for sure. And I find that typically creative blocks will come when other aspects of one's life, like there's like, you know, there's some issue or limitation in other aspects. Like if you're feeling tired and you're not eating well, or there's stress at work or whatever it might be. So those things can like kind of leak into the creativity. So for me, I just find the best way to deal with it is to kind of just step back and take a break and not push. So I'll never push to create if I'm feeling those blocks. I'll actually just step completely back, take time for myself, look at other people's art, go to some galleries, go into nature, you know, as you said, meditate, watch some films. I'll try and just take that breather until that kind of momentum comes. And, you know, life is a cycle anyway of ups and downs. So there's no way around that for anyone, essentially. Some people have bigger ups and downs, of course, but essentially it's always going to be up and down. So it's kind of just flowing with that, essentially. And if sometimes I'm having a down, that can be a good creative outlet, for example. That could be that you're feeling a bit down, so you put that into the music a little bit, you know, like something can come of it. But if not, I will typically, my first reaction is to step back and just take a breather, essentially.
And I think you're obviously helping yourself tremendously, and it's a really strong message for people, with the acknowledgement that, look, life is like this sometimes. There's no, because the ruminating and the beating ourselves up and, oh, life's not fair, or I'm no good, or the world's against me, or any of those things just compounds on top of a creative block and makes it all the harder. You dig the rut far deeper than it is. It makes it that much more difficult to get out of it. But by acknowledging that, look, you know, whether it's cycles or life is like the seasons, and, you know, sometimes it's the winter, sometimes it's the spring and the summer. I will get through this. Right now, let's just step back and give it a bit of self-care, I guess, as well in there. Absolutely. Until the time's right.
Completely. And then the other part for me, which is again more on, I guess, the meditation side, is the practice I like has really helped me a lot, is this letting go concept, where you just, in those moments, if things are like a bit crappy and I'm not feeling creative, I just like completely like surrender and let go and enjoy the moment and just enjoy my coffee and go to the park and take it easy, just laugh at life in a sense. Like it's all, at the end of the day, nothing's too serious. Like we come, we go. So when you let go like that, it kind of just rejigs you a little bit to get out of that kind of dense, like those dense moments that we all have and accumulate, and we accumulate a bit of negative energy, that stops the creativity. So that letting go process has helped me a lot, kind of just if I'm feeling down or stressed or irritated. It's just a perspective of kind of just like, well, life's good. I can just enjoy a simple walk and a simple coffee, and it's all good. And then that immediately starts to kind of regenerate the creativity.
Yeah, totally. So you mentioned before the idea of flow and creative flow, and it's never going to happen when you're all uptight and everything's all serious and heavy and dense, as you mentioned. So I think that's amazing advice. So if we do move forward then to, like, it's a fast moving world, in your world with all these ideas, what ventures are coming up? What are we got coming up in the future from you?
So NFT, this is actually this week. So that's been, it's been in the works for a while. Very excited about that. The big goal is this immersive exhibition for next year, to really do that on a large scale. This film / DJ set is something I'm really excited about. And I'm looking at how you essentially create it in a way that you can sit down and watch this kind of 1 hour story, and it really feels like you're immersed in it. It's all original music, all unreleased music. I'd love to even show it somewhere if it's good enough, like stick it in a cinema with a cool surround sound or something like that. But other than those kind of core projects, at the heart of it is the music making still for me, and just kind of pushing the boundary on that as much as possible. I mean, I really want to try and take my productions to like a new, like just push further and really make special music. So that's kind of something else. And this is contradictory, but overall, the contradiction I'm going to say now is like, I'm trying to just go with the flow. So I don't try to over plan. I'm just trying to really go with the flow of all these things and just enjoy it as much as possible. Because I find when I just enjoy it as much as possible day to day, the coolest stuff ends up happening. Whereas if I start planning and freaking out over it too much, it can block it sometimes.
Yeah. I like that. Freaking out is counterproductive. We could probably have that as a quote from you. So is there, have we got any like new cuts, new records that are about to drop in the near future that people can keep their ears open for?
Yeah, so I have a collaboration with Book a Shade coming out.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
August 20 on their label, which is huge for me. Like, I mean, I was listening to them when I was like a kid, so it's really surreal to me to do something with them. So that's kind of the next big release. And then I'm sitting on 1 or 2 tracks that, funny enough, still have not been signed, but to me, they're the best pieces of music I've made. So that's a good message to like a lot of people who are trying to sign their music. Like, this is probably for me the best record I've made. It has the most feeling, and still no one signed it. So that's just the name of the game, I guess. It's persistence, just believing in it until, someone else also believes in it, and it will happen eventually.
Yeah, superb. So just the last question, which we always like to close things out, and in many respects you might have even dropped this information along the way because it's been awesome. It's like so many great shares, thank you. Is if you were jumping back in time to advise yourself, whatever, maybe 10 years ago, perhaps a little bit more, when you were just starting out, that key piece of information that you think will really help people to move forward on their journey, what would it be?
I would say it's to fully two. Can I give you 2?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Always more is always welcome. Yeah.
I'd say overall, like just mentality wise, is to just fully enjoy the journey. So not get caught up if you're not getting signed, not worry about other people like being more successful, just fully enjoy every moment in the studio, fully enjoy every moment you're making music, learning about it, just take it as a pure act of, a passion. Because if you do that, you can't go wrong, essentially. That's the way forward. I'd say the second thing is don't be hard on yourself, because even for me, as I was becoming more successful from nothing to something slowly, even then I was hard on myself. I'd still be like, well, I'm not playing at that festival yet, and I'm not, and it's just looking back now, I'm like, wow, I was doing really well back then. And I kind of, you can self-sabotage through that, you know? So I say, just don't be hard on yourself. Like, take the time to be happy when you finish a track. Take the time to be happy if someone offers you like a gig or whatever it is that you're doing. Like, enjoy those small milestones, because there are always going to be these small milestones. It's never like a moment you reach. It's always just small milestones. So it's good to enjoy them. And the final thing, just pure on a production level, is actually to finish the music, like, as you know, which is what this is all about, is try your best to really like finish the tracks, because I've seen that with so many talented producers. They don't finish the tracks and they just leave them. And if they had, they would have unbelievable music. So it's good to close up projects to a degree that you can send them out, get stuff out to the world, then improve, get stuff out into the world, then improve. But don't just hold on looking for some perfect hit, because it doesn't happen like that. You just have to finish and put it out, finish, put it out, and keep growing like that. I just ranted there. So
they were great. Like 3 takeaways, absolutely superb. You know, don't be hard on yourself. Enjoy the journey, and get your music finished and get it out into the world. And I think that's, you know, that the thing about the journey is just so important, because the milestones, and I agree totally, always celebrate them and always acknowledge that they're moments in time, but the journey is forever. It's every moment. It's who you are. It's what life is all about. So I think, like, incredible advice. And like, from the start to finish, this has been epic. I've been like totally engrossed in all the things you're saying. I think the advice, the journey, your experience, and maybe the overarching joy and positivity and enthusiasm you have is absolutely infectious. So thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's been incredible.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolute legend. And I want to know when this installation's out. I'll definitely be shouting to everybody about it as well, because I think, like, it would be very difficult to have listened to this and not be like, yeah, when is this thing? I want to go and experience that. So let us know and we'll shout about it. And I think it'd be brilliant for us to catch up again on the show afterwards, when you've got all of the story to tell about that. So I'd be delighted if you come back in the future.
Would love to.
Rashid, legend. Thank you so much, buddy.
Take care.